first of all, again, thank everybody for joining. This is now our second COVID-19 pre-K to 12, and this is quite an education pandemic response task force. Quite a mouthful, but I do appreciate you guys taking the time to join us this evening. We have a lot of great information that we would like to share as we move forward to, I think, making in the days to come some very, very important critical decisions relative to reopening in the fall. So having said that, I know Cindy's working on attendance, and then and Cindy, did you want to do the approval of the minutes first before you get into the rest of my welcome? Or
yes, and I'll go ahead and pull up our PowerPoint and get us started here. Thank you, Dr. Atkins. All right, so hopefully people will be able to see that in just a second. So as Dr. Atkins said, we're really happy to have everyone here today, and we will get the Google document at the very end, since as people are signing in, they can't see the document link. So everyone should have minutes from the last meeting. Those were sent out by our secretary, Melixa Trez. Thank you, Melixa. So if you have a moment, just take a look at those if you have not. And do we have a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting?
I'll motion it, Cindy.
Thank you. And a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in agreement, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
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 I hear lots of ayes. Any opposed? All right. Sounds like we have our minutes ready to roll. Thank you. Now, Dr. Atkins, formal welcome. Thanks.
all right, again, thank you, team. Before I get started with some of the plans for this particular meeting, I know we have some new faces that have joined the task force, or some that could not make it to our meeting last week. So I'm going to introduce you one at a time. If you could tell us just very briefly a little bit about yourself, who you represent. So the first person, Jolene Harris. And if I mispronounce your name, let me know.
No, it's okay. It's Jolene Harris. I'm a parent of a high school student at Dunbar High School and a future student at Lehigh Acres Middle. I'm an senior environmental analyst with South Florida Water Management District. So I've been in public agency work for nearly 20 years, and I look forward to serving on the task force. Thank you.
All righty, thank you. Next person, Sedona Stewart.
Hi, I'm the school representative of the South Zone, and I am a rising 11th grader at Bonita Springs High School. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you very much. Next, Samantha Hauer.
My name is Samantha Hauer. I'm a high school art teacher at Mariner High. I'm also an Area 2 coordinator for TALC, and I'm representing not just high school, but the electives as well.
All right, thank you. Next, Heather Rodriguez-Wibbles.
Forgot to unmute. Hi, I'm Heather Rodriguez-Wibbles. I'm at Colusa Middle as an academic advisor. I'm representing middle school level teachers.
All righty, thank you. And finally, Joseph Campachuro. I saw Joseph earlier. There he is.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Camputaro, and I'm a fifth grade teacher at the Sanibel School, and I'm representing the elementary teachers.
All right. Thanks, Joe. So this evening, as I mentioned, we're going to go into really a lot of great information that I think you'll find will really help us with some of the important decisions that we have to make. Our team here has been working really for the last few months, just compiling the research, working with other districts, working with our state agencies to bring this information, I think, forward and help us with our decision making. So tonight, our team is going to present some different models that they have been working on that really look at different scenarios that we might open. I mean, of course, obviously our goal is to open at 100% as is typical. But if conditions are not such, or the guidance that we get from the state is not such that would allow us to do that, we have to have some alternatives that look at different models in terms of how we do school and how we also do things such as transportation, so that we make sure that we're protecting the health and safety of our staff and of course, most importantly, our students, staff and students. So lots of hard work has been put into this model. So I want to thank the people in advance for just some really incredible work that they have been putting in here, a lot of time and effort. I think you'll be impressed as well. So for those of us watching this meeting virtually, please feel free to send comments and thoughts through to our dedicated email address, which is reopeningschools@leeschools.net. I do want to also make everybody aware that we are live streaming. So that is so that we can also provide this information out to our public, and so they're aware of our plans as well. So having said that, Cindy, if you'd like to take it over and take us through the information. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Atkins. I'm going to share screen again in just a moment, and we're going to start out by reviewing a little bit of the survey data. So everyone should have received the PDF of the different surveys. So you know there was a lot of information there. We're not going to go through all of it since you have had time to review it. Just going to highlight a few areas for you. So I'm going to share screen here. And hopefully you will be able to see that in just a moment. All right, thank you. Just a quick review of our purpose of our committee, and that's to provide Dr. Atkins with some feedback on these models that we're going to talk about today in order to make sure that we have a great reopening of our schools. We'll start with our survey results looking at the level of comfort with students who are returning to in-person instruction. And we broke these down into responses to the English language survey and responses to the non-English language survey, because in some cases there were some significant differences there. So I hope to give you a little bit different perspective than what you would see just going through the PDF of the responses that you received. So if you take a look at this, these are broken down by elementary, middle, and high school. And you may notice that the numbers look a little different than what you had on your surveys, because I took out the people who said we do not have a student attending that level, and then did the percentages based upon the people who actually had students attending that level. So if people who have a student in elementary school, you'll see those are in the orange color there. And we had the 4 different areas: not at all comfortable, somewhat comfortable, comfortable with concerns, and comfortable with minimal or no concerns. So you have a look at that one, and then we're going to go to the next one. This would be the respondents who took the non-English language survey. And you can see there's quite a difference there. Before we go on, like you know, you will get this presentation, so don't worry about trying to remember exactly what these pictures look like. You will get this presentation after tonight's meeting. Also, if you can hold all of your questions until the end of tonight's presentations, so that we have time to make sure everyone hears all the information, and then we will have time for discussion at the end. As you can see, there's quite a difference there. The next thing we looked at was our staff members. And what is the staff level of comfort with returning to work on a normal schedule? You can see that over 60% of staff are comfortable with a few concerns or minimal or no concerns. So we are ready, for the most part, to come back to school. Just the same as our community, we want to make sure that everything is in place for a very safe and equitable reopening. So if those reopening guidelines are met, here are the preferred attendance models from our families, and the families who took the English language survey are in blue, the non-English language survey are in orange, and again, you can see a difference in the preferences there between the physically at school, the distance learning, and the hybrid or combination model. And here is preferred attendance for our staff, assuming that those guidelines are open and we're ready to go back in person. The next item that we talked about was if we go back, but we have to have some modifications. What are your preferences if we need to do some social distancing, if we need to have some extra time? So how do we do that? So the preferences here are looking at the 2 shifts where students would come either morning or afternoon, alternate days where they might come on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday might be a virtual day, alternate weeks, or having a full virtual program. And you can see there the responses. So starting with that information as kind of a background, we're now going to move into some of the options for full-blown models for this fall. And again, please hold those questions till the very end so that Dr. Spiro and his staff have time to give you all of the information. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Spiro.
Thank you, Cindy. I really do appreciate it, and great information that you shared in the survey, so thanks for leading that. What we're going to talk about tonight are some we can go back, that's fine. What we're going to talk about tonight are some frameworks, just some options, some starting points that a number of people have worked on really over the last few weeks and a month or so that we're bringing here to you. So there have been many iterations to this process, and I kind of want to give you a sense of the people that have been involved in creating these options that you're going to see tonight. First, we had all of our executive directors from school development involved. Those are the individuals that are over elementary, middle, high, K-8, and our special centers as well. So that's Dr. Denise Carlin, Shanna Fletcher, Linda Mayer, and Clayton Simmons. Our directors for curriculum and instruction for all levels were involved. That's Candace Olivedo, Lori Houchin, and Dr. Bethany Quisenberry. We had our ESC team leaders involved, and that was Teresa Bowen. Teresa was involved. Dr. Evelyn Rivera from ESOL. She has had an opportunity to have input, some big input into what we're going to talk about tonight. Chuck Bradley came with the lens of looking at our students that are 504, how we could meet those accommodations. Jessica Duncan, she is our executive director for student services. She had a hand in this as well. We also had our pre-K team, Jeannie LaFountain, who's getting ready to retire, so it was great to really give her honest perspective, and Tiffany Franklin from pre-K were involved in this too. I also want to thank Beth Whiff, and Beth is actually part of this committee. Beth has been really an amazing source for us about health and everything that we should consider, so she has been our go-to person here at the district, so I want to tip my hat to Beth and say thank you very much, Beth. We've also had some directors and executive directors giving us guidance on what activities could look like in regards to athletics and the arts. And so that's been David LaRosa and Dr. Doug Santini. We also then met with Dr. Desimore and Susan Millay. We talked about food service because we're going to talk a little bit, well, how is lunch served? How's breakfast served? What does that really mean in the schoolhouse? And so Dr. Desimore and her team have a plan, and they've been able to provide some guidance for us. Dr. Savage, who you're going to hear from tonight, talked to us about health and safety concerns, talked to us about transportation implications with a variety of these models. And of course, then we also had technology needs. And so Mr. Trey Davis and Dwayne Alton, that team provided guidance to everybody about what the technology could look like. So as you can see, it's been a lot of individuals over a long period of time that have worked and reworked these plans. So what you have on the screen for you right now are just some of the pieces of research that we considered. We did a lot of reading. We wanted to know what is happening internationally. We wanted to know what's happening across the country. You had some states that were opening up earlier than others. You had national organizations that were providing guidance. You had some local counties that were getting out there early as well. So we tried to get our hands on as much research as possible so we could read it and we could make sure that we're meeting the needs of our students locally. And really the themes that you're going to see tonight with the different models that I'm going to share with you are really a snapshot of everything that we have seen across the country. So they're very similar to everything that we have read, very similar on the types of approaches that they have made. And so you're going to see some of that replicated with our plans, but come the end of the day, we have to do what's best for our students and our county. So let's start off with our first model. And as Dr. Atkins talked about, Cindy, if you want to change that for me.
Yeah, I'm working on that.
So as Dr. Atkins was talking, first started, Dr. Atkins talked, thank you. Dr. Atkins said, our goal is obviously, going back one more. Our goal, one more after that. Keep going back. Wrong way.
Yeah, there we go. Back.
Keep going.
Yeah, we're trying here. It's just not cooperating.
There we go. All right, perfect, right there. Thank you, Cindy. All right, so as Dr. Atkins was saying, our goal is, obviously, we'd love to have everybody back in person. That would be the ideal scenario. And yes, they come back in person, but then you would also have some health and safety standards that would need to be in place. And Dr. Savage is going to talk a little bit about that after I get through with some of these models to talk about what could some of those health standards look like that are replicated at all of our schools. So that's the first model. We come back face to face. There are health and safety standards that are in place for all schools. And then we also had a piece in there. What happens if I'm a family and I'm not ready to come back? I still want to continue with distance learning. I want this virtual option until I really feel comfortable sending my students back to school if we come back face to face. We want to be able to have a plan in place that allows everybody to come back full in person, and then also at the same time, let families continue a virtual option if they choose to keep their students at home for a period of time. So that's model one. Go ahead, Cindy. Now I'm going to talk to you about a variety of different hybrid models, and they're all around this premise that I'm going to share with you. Our premise is we would like to have all pre-K to sixth grade students, all those students come back to school, all of them face to face. We understand the importance of early education. There is nothing that replicates face-to-face learning. We want to try to decrease the academic dip, that instructional loss that we know that we might be expecting from distance learning. And so we would like in these models, our recommendation is bring all pre-K to sixth students back for full face-to-face instruction. Now, with that being said, so what does that mean? That means classes have to be refigured. So all extraneous furniture would need to be removed from classes. They would need to get rid of file cabinets, extra desks, things that don't meet the needs for students. All those desks would have to be spread out as far as possible, and students would have to be social distanced the best that we could. In pre-K through fifth grade, all those students would remain with their teacher. There would be a cohort of students that would see their same teacher every day. They would come to school and stay in the class, and then we would rotate in special area teachers. We'd rotate in art, we'd rotate in music, we'd rotate in STEM, all the different specials and electives that are offered in pre-K through 5, those would be rotated into the class to minimize movement inside of the building. We'd also have lunch brought into the classroom where the students would eat lunch in the class. They would do recess and PE outside still, but they would do that in isolation just with a cohort of students. The reason we do that is so that we can identify if there is a student who does have, let's say, for example, gets COVID-19, we're then able to identify what class that student was in, who had contact with that student, so we try to minimize that contact as much as possible. So I'm sure the union is thinking, well, heck, how are we going to let teachers get their lunch? How are we going to let the teachers also get time for planning? There will be a schedules worked out with school administration. Every school will have to work out a plan to make sure that teachers get the lunch they need and also that the planning they need as well. So that's the first premise we're working with. Go ahead, Cindy. So we said pre-K.
Just real quick, could you again just clarify just to make sure everybody understands a cohort?
Sure, cohort, thank you, Dr. Atkins. So a cohort is the group of students assigned to that teacher would stay with that teacher all day. So I'm Jeff Spiro. I have a group of 20 students. Those 20 students would be with me all day. They would not travel into the building to go to an art teacher's class, or they would not travel into the building to go to a music teacher's class. They would stay in that class, and those teachers would come to them in the class. Did I clarify that for you, Dr. Atkins? Thank you, sir. So now when we talk about 7th through 12th grade, it would be a combination of both face-to-face instruction as well as distance learning. But we would provide daily face-to-face instruction for students who are ESE, 504 students, our ELL, English language learner students, are also our school's lowest 25%, and any student that is deficient in their credits. Those students would come to school every day face-to-face for that direct instruction because they need the most intensive support. Other students then would have face-to-face instruction and a combination of distance learning. Now, the distance learning model we're talking about is different than what the students have experienced for these last 9 weeks. The last 9 weeks, distance learning was very flexible, allowed flexibility for teachers, allowed flexibilities for families. The distance learning we're talking about for the upcoming school year, if we're doing a hybrid model, would mean that classes would be live. They would mirror real-time face-to-face instruction. So some students would be in the class receiving that face-to-face instruction, while other students are at home, logged on. The teacher is sharing their screen with the students. The chat box is enabled, and the teacher is doing face-to-face instruction, and the students are engaged with real-time digital distance learning. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about distance learning. It's different than what we've experienced. So here, Eric, thank you very much. So we also look at arranging classes to minimize movement. So for example, in middle school, when there are teams, we try to make sure that classrooms are close in proximity to each other so that grade levels could stay together to minimize movement. Lunches also would be provided into the classroom for teachers. So to minimize large gatherings, large areas where students may be. Schools would then work with their executive directors from school development to work on plans inside of the school. For example, they would have to work on one-way student traffic. That may mean staggered classroom transitions. That also may mean elimination of large student gatherings during class changes. You wouldn't have those kids congregating in class changes. Before and after school, students would have to make sure that there's a process in place to get them into the building and then right to their classroom as well. Those plans would work directly with principals, with their executive directors, because every building has unique physical plant layouts. So we'd want to make sure that we take into account the layout of each school as each school is developing their plan. Go ahead, Cindy. So now we're going to talk about, so that's the premise. Premise pre-K to 6th grade, everybody comes back face-to-face, we're social distancing. We're saying 7th to 12th grade are going to be hybrid models that I'm getting ready to talk about. But we know within these hybrid models, we said that are exceptional students, English language learner students, our lowest 25%, our 504, and our credit deficient students, those kids come every day. So everything we're talking about in these hybrid models are all those students that are not in those groups. So here's option one. Our option one is an alternating schedule, an A day and a B day. So I have an example up on the screen of what a typical A day and a B day would look like. So student on a Monday, so student 1 is in class receiving face-to-face instruction, while student 2 is home doing the live distance learning into the class where that other student is face-to-face. Tuesday comes, they flip. Student 2 is now face-to-face in the classroom, while student 1 now is home doing that live distance learning with the teacher. It's not a repeat of the same lesson on day 2. The lesson is continuing to move forward, which is why the importance of having live classes so that we don't lose that instructional momentum. We continue to move forward with instruction. That's the important part of that. Wednesday then goes back to what Monday looked like, where student 1 comes to school, student 2 is virtual. Thursday flips again. Again, student 2 comes back in face-to-face. Student 1 is distance learning. Friday, everybody is home distance learning. That allows the school to get a cleaning that may need to take place, a deeper cleaning, getting the school then ready for the upcoming week. So that's option 1 that we're calling AB, and we put a C on the end for that Friday for virtual day. Now that Friday virtual day, that day could slide anywhere in that schedule. It could be we put everybody on Wednesday, for example, everybody's virtual, and the school gets a cleaning halfway through the week, and then we slide the other days down to Thursday and Friday. So that's adjustable depending upon the considerations of this task force here. Next slide, Cindy. So slide 2 is similar to slide 1. So slide 1 was, option 1 was A-Day, B-Day, where they alternate the days. This is simply an AA-BB day. So kids will go to school 2 days in a row to get face-to-face instruction. So using that same example I used with option 1, student 1 would come to school face-to-face on Monday and Tuesday. They're in school face-to-face, while student 2 is home doing virtual learning on Monday and Tuesday. And then they flip, and student 2 comes to school face-to-face on Wednesday and Thursday, while student 1 is back home doing live distance learning on Wednesday and Thursday, and again on Friday, everybody's home doing distance learning to allow for deep cleaning of the building. Again, I reiterate that Friday day could be slid anywhere into any of those days during the week, whatever the group feels works best. That's option 2, AABB. Cindy? So option 3 are alternating weeks. So then we looked at, okay, so let's look at FaceTime with students with teachers. So we considered a 2-week alternating schedule. So week 1, a student comes Monday through Friday, every day. They're in school face-to-face all day long. Student 2 is home doing live distance learning all day week 1. Week 2 comes and they flip. Student 2 now becomes face-to-face Monday through Friday, while student 1 is home doing live distance learning. Thanks, Cindy. Next option. Option 4 is similar. If you remember, the second option I talked about was option AABB, where student had gone to school 2 days in a row, and then they had that Friday off where everybody did distance learning. This now adds a day on that Friday to allow students over a 2-week period of time to see their teachers face-to-face 3 times, 3 days over a 2-week period. So here's your example. Week 1, student 1 comes to school. They're face-to-face on Monday and Tuesday. Student 2 is doing live distance learning on Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday, they flip. Student 2 now comes, and they're doing face-to-face Wednesday and Thursday. Student 1 is home doing distance learning live. And then Friday, student 1 comes back in for face-to-face, while student 2 is home doing live distance learning. So if you look at week 1, student 1 has Monday, Tuesday, and Friday where they're face-to-face with their teachers. They get three days face-to-face. Now you go to week 2. The only difference in week 2, between week 2 and week 1, is that Friday. So instead of student 1 coming in face-to-face on that second week, it's student 2 that comes in face-to-face. So they get their 3 days of face-to-face instruction. So on week 2, that bottom table, it shows you student 2 in person on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So that gives them their 3 days of face-to-face instruction. So that's hybrid model 4. Next one, Cindy. And then our last model is that all students would participate in distance learning. And again, if we had to go to a full-blown distance learning model, it would look different than what we've done for the last 9 weeks. Again, this would be live classes. It mirrors real-time, face-to-face instruction. And yes, is this challenging for teachers? Absolutely is it challenging for teachers. Do these models with this half distance learning, half face-to-face, do these models limit the type of student engagement that we like to see in class where students are working in collaborative groups? Absolutely they do. However, we're in different times and we have to think differently. So then the question becomes, then how can we use things such as digital tools maybe to engage our students when we can't put them into, for example, Kagan structures as one example. So, we have to think differently coming back because we're in different times, and hence why we add this distance learning face-to-face model as a chance to try to maximize as much face-to-face instruction as we can for our students. So those are the variety of models that we wanted to present to you tonight. Again, these are starting points for this task force to look at, for this task force to consider, and then say, yeah, this works on this plan, this doesn't work on this plan. Have you thought about, and then give us some other options to go back to work on. So that's the model presentation, Cindy.
Dr. Spiro, just one thing before you transition, that I just wanted the team to know. Part of the thing that they've tried to do with these recommendations is first and foremost, I think we all come in with the number one assumption that the student, the best way to educate a student is face to face with a high quality teacher. That's just that's just the best way to do it. And then the other thing that they're certainly looking at, as he indicated, the age of the student, recognizing that need at a younger age, but also trying to be sensitive to some of the childcare issues that our parents might experience, and when a virtual environment may be less of a burden on our families in Lee County. So those are two of the big reasons why are behind the hybrid model. Last thing I just want people to know is that on the call with superintendents across the state, very, very similar in some of the plans that many of them are contemplating in terms of some of these different age structures. I think with really the same assumptions in mind as we've got here in Lee County with our team. So thanks to the team. Thank you, Dr. Spiro and Cindy. I just appreciate you letting me to butt in there.
No, absolutely. Thank you. So you heard those models. With each of those, there are going to be some areas that are going to need some key considerations. The first thing we look at, what were the primary concerns with students returning to schools? From our parents' point of view, again, we looked at these from the parents who took the English language survey and the families who took the non-English language survey. And I just pulled out the top 4 because there was a pretty significant gap in the other numbers. But when you look at these, top concerns were these 4: public health regulations not being followed, classrooms or other gathering areas not being properly disinfected, having the availability of disinfecting materials or PPE, and then those interpersonal interactions, which are the core of what we do when we come to school. So you can take a look there around those concerns. Then we had talked about what were some of the disease prevention methods or measures that we are considering putting in place. And please remember, nothing has been decided, but considering these, what is your agreement? And you may remember on the survey, it was agree or disagree. This just shows the percent that agreed with each of these areas. And again, you can see a big difference between the English language survey, the non-English language survey, and the green bar there are the school-based staff. Again, that may look a little different than the numbers on the surveys you received because some of those people said, I do not work in a school, so we took those out and did the percentages based only on school-based staff since they were the group that were going to be there. So as you can see, we have a lot of things to consider to make sure that we are having a safe reopening. I'm going to toss it over to Dr. Savage at this point, and he's going to go a little further into some of those considerations.
Thank you, Cindy. Yes, as we've talked about various different models, one question that gets raised right away is how does this impact transportation? And the 3 broad stroke differences, whether it's full virtual, if you were to have a full virtual system, there is really no established need to transport students in a full virtual environment. However, if you were to have to transition to back to a live or hybrid environment, then of course that need would all of a sudden present itself. And so that fluidity between models would be very significant unless you were to say be in a full virtual the entirety of the year, in which case that would have a dramatic impact on the transportation need. Conversely, if you go to the regular full daily attendance, K through 12, pre-K through 12, then that really has the very similar demand and need to what we currently have. So that would mean the same number of buses, same number of drivers, and all those things in very much the status quo when we are in standard business. But where it gets tricky is when we move into the in-between option, the hybrid option, because how it impacts transportation, our ability to transport students, really greatly varies depending on the various different models. If it were shifts in terms of the morning, the afternoon type of situation, that is a substantial change to the way we currently transport, as well as any of the other hybrid models have some varying degrees of impact. So we'll start with the most obvious component, which is bus capacities. Our largest buses in what constitutes the majority of our buses in the district are 77 passenger buses. Now, if you were to observe the strictest 6-foot CDC protocol in its strictest sense, 6 feet between students, that means on a 7-passenger bus, you would be able to get anywhere 9 occupied seats, which, if that were individual students, that would be 9 students. If they were siblings in the same family, then you could put some of those students in the same seat. So you're really looking then at anywhere from 9 to 12 to 13 students on a bus. Well, for a 77-passenger bus, only transporting 9 to 12 students at over $4.04 in terms of to operate a bus, that is a pretty substantial cost and not a lot of efficiency in terms of the ability to transport students. And so that is at the most strict version of that implementation. However, there are many other models being discussed throughout the state. That includes things such as having students in alternating rows, having students, 2 students in per seat, skipping rows, having 1 student per seat in the entire bus, skipping 2 rows, and all of those things, what they really impact is just the amount of students you can transport. And so, as you can imagine, across the state, this is something districts are grappling with. And in fact, for many, they realize that to operate bus at low capacities is simply not a functional use of a school bus when it's too low. It just dramatically inhibits your ability to transport students. Now, of course, one way to offset that would be to buy a significant number of additional buses. The challenge there is that not only would you have to buy significant additional buses, you would also have to hire a significant number of additional drivers, which of course we already have a driver shortage in Lee County. It's hard enough for us to get just the drivers we need. So these are all things that are substantial challenges if we were to go to reduced capacities on the buses. So alternatively, we evaluate things such as the hygiene standards and protective standards on the buses in order to try to keep a higher capacity so that you aren't dramatically reducing your ability to serve a number of students. And that would include things such as masks. Transportation is not viewed the same way as every other service, in the sense that it is considered a privilege. And so you can put in additional considerations for families. And those are all things that we're evaluating in terms of these various protective standards that we could offer, that if folks did not want to engage in those protective standards, then that service may not be available to them or in some diminished capacity. The fourth piece is the bus cleaning protocols. And this is something that really, no matter what kind of model we run, it will be substantial in the sense that we want to make sure our buses are very clean and that they are cleaned after every single route, and that there are very basic protocols in place to ensure that our buses are very clean and safe from that standpoint, and using the appropriate chemicals and the appropriate training for those cleaning procedures, and that they're deployed consistently and that they are done with great frequency. The last consideration we have in transportation has to do with reducing services. Now, again, one of the things that we are looking to do as a district already is moving towards more of a proximity-based plan in our district. Now, we're still a ways off from that model, but that happens to be, if we find that we were in some type of reduced bus capacity being recommended where there are fewer students on a bus, then the proximity considerations, could potentially be something that would assist in that. So we have mileage restrictions where we aren't transporting a significant mileage, so that we are able to reduce that overall transportation burden. Again, none of these are ideal scenarios because school buses were not really designed in a COVID-style environment. And so it really does require looking at these various different considerations and the various options as far as they're presented, and then making some very difficult decisions about how we will adjust our services accordingly. But all of it really does hinge on what type of model do we implement for the fall. So if you want to advance to the next slide. So along with transportation, and kind of reference some of these, but just in general in our schools, and as Dr. Spiro mentioned at the outset, again, these are collaborations, not just within operations, but across the whole organization in terms of health services is a huge lead role in this, as well as our maintenance and a number of others. And so these are all different measures that are currently under evaluation, various different proposals and deployments. So we have things such as permanent and semi-permanent measures, such as plexiglass shielding. Those types of offers are being looked at in areas such as our front reception, models looking at teacher areas having plexiglass, as well as any other high-risk area where there's a significant level of traffic as a permanent or semi-permanent measure. In addition, models such as plastic curtains being installed in various different areas to try to create some separation or things that are being done elsewhere, and it's the models that are evaluated. Hands-free water fountains, again, to diminish one of the issues we have, which is a commonly touched surface, such as water fountains, so moving in a hands-free water fountain direction. All those things are under evaluation for cost and benefit, and for what is the ultimate effective impact it has on making us safer. Below that, you'll see the cleaning protocols. Our routine surface cleaning is one of our best front line of defenses. We already had a well-established flu season cleaning protocol and chemicals that are effective against COVID-19 as well. But this has taken that and increased the frequency and the significance of that flu season protocol being done with greater frequency. So there's various different pieces being evaluated within that. Inspection procedures. How do we ensure that those things are being done to a certain level of quality assurance? And so what are the different protocols, who's inspecting them, and what level of processes will be in place to track that, as well as when there are concerns. If a teacher or if parents are concerned that a particular area, they don't believe that those protocols are being followed, what are the procedures for that? Deep cleaning protocols. This gets into more of what's referred to as a response level event. So when there are cases of suspected COVID exposure, when there are potential presumed positives or all manner of different things that can come through our tracking and screening protocols, then the deep cleaning is triggered. And that's a much more intensive cleaning protocol that we have already in place that tackles an aerosolized version of, as well as a deep, so all of the surfaces in the room, the walls, the windows, and the air treatment, all those things are done to immediately kill any potential airborne COVID, as well as COVID that's on any surfaces. So those are things that are done in the cases where COVID is suspected. That we transfer over to disposable measures and hygiene protocols. This includes many of the things we've talked about already, such as PPE, personal protective equipment, masks, facial coverings, gloves, protective garments. Those are the kinds of things that we're in the process of evaluating, various different levels of that material available, either required or available to staff, students, and various different proposals associated to that. Hand sanitizer. Hand sanitizer, whether it's personal use that are available in classrooms or large dispensers, the number of them, where are they located, all those types of things are being evaluated as well. Hand washing guidelines. This, again, is something that the public and medical community and all of us here are pretty much united on, which is one of the most important things we can help students and staff and all people in our society is just proper hand washing guidelines being followed, and how significant that is, and not just for COVID, but for all manner of disease transmission. That's a pretty significant one. We get into air quality. This is where, fortunately, we have an expert on staff in our maintenance department as pertains to air quality. So this really gets into protocols evaluating our HVAC systems, as well as indoor air and outdoor standards, and some of the things we do to evaluate our air quality as well. Cindy, if you move to the next slide. These health and safety considerations continue with screening protocols, such as what are specific expectations we give to parents, as well as self-reporting expectations for employees and others. This, as Dr. Spiro mentioned earlier, there is clearly an emphasis on temperature taking or symptom checking procedures, so that there is some mechanism in place before students are even into the building, whether that's on buses, whether that's when they arrive. All these different protocols are under evaluation, as well as testing procedures as they continue to evolve. Testing is something that continues to change all throughout our society in terms of availability, rapid testing, antibody testing, and a number of other things. So as those things change, we'll certainly be staying abreast of that as well in our communications with the medical community. And last, well, no, sorry, not last, but our response protocols. Again, I made some reference to this earlier. When we get into suspected cases, presumed positive, as well as confirmed cases, which protocols are engaged in all of those eventualities? How do we communicate, and how do we make determinations such as classrooms being closed, where an individual classroom at risk, as well as school closure decisions when there are cases identified within a school. Last but not least, we have physical site capacities, utilization, and building entry and site movement standards. These are all things that occur about how we use our facilities within the existing facility footprint. So how do people move about those facilities? How many students do we put in a room under various different configurations of distancing requirements, from the most stringent to some of the least stringent. So all of those things are being evaluated, and that includes visual models of the classrooms, actual models pulled from our fish drawings of actual classrooms here in our district, high school, middle, elementary, large cafeterias, gymnasiums, how they could be utilized in various different visual models so that we can see what we can do under various scenarios. So all those things are under evaluation. As you can imagine, there's too much individual detail for every single one of those topics to give you a full slide on it at this exact moment. But as those things become of interest to the task force, and as we get closer on deciding exactly which model, then we'll bring forward any of the specific considerations that pertain to that model relative to these various topics. With that said, I think I'm ready for the next slide. I'm turning it back to Cindy. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Spiro and Dr. Savage, thank you both for that overview of the things that are being considered. As you can tell, there has been a lot of thought put into not just how to go about giving curriculum and making sure that our students have a great learning environment, but making sure that it is a safe one as well, all the way from the time they leave home to get on one of our buses and so they get to school. I'm going to stop sharing the screen at this time so that I can see the participants. And we're going to open it up for 30 minutes of discussion. It's not stopping, so here we go.
Cindy, I see Kevin Daly's hand up.
Okay, great. So if you would utilize the raising your hand area there, and I will monitor that. And if Mrs. Stillwell, if you will help me monitor that as well, make sure we get people. When you're called on, if you will unmute, and then if there's a specific person that your question is for, go ahead and say their name. And if it's not, if it's a general one, then we'll direct it to the person that we feel is most likely to be able to give you the best answer on that. Okay, so we'll start with Mr. Daly.
Hey, everybody. So I guess what I need to kind of talk about, it's not necessarily a question. We're in phase 2, according to our governor. But honestly, we haven't met the requirements of a 14-day case decrease that would have even started phase 1. So I'm concerned that people are ignoring that. And not us here in this group, but people are ignoring that in an effort to push forward. And I think we need to have some real practical conversations about if we decide to social distance in classrooms, exactly how many desks we can fit in there related to the space available at different levels. I mean, I kind of agree with the idea that the younger you are and the more support you need, the more likely you are to have to come back to school face-to-face. But I also think we need to consider school populations. There may be a school that has a really high percentage of ESE, lower 25%, those students that would require maybe 70% of any particular school to have to come back, whereas another school, simply because of their makeup, would be fewer students that have to come back. And so these are all good starting points. I've been saying to myself and other people, I think the only rough idea is the status quo idea right now. And so, I've gathered some people together with my group, and we're going to kind of take these models and send it out to our separate groups and and jointly beat them up and figure out how it works at different levels. But I think some attention should be paid to practically how many kids we can get in different size classrooms. I'm hopeful there's a standard size classroom around the district and we can figure that out and really pay attention to social distancing. And I'm sure Jamie's going to address the cleaning issue and perhaps the need for, greater custodial stuff. But that's kind of my first take on it.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Spiro, did you have a response?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. As you guys are, here's my request, at least, as you guys are working the plans and you're coming up with alternative solutions, that's really what we're looking for, right? So when we talk about the practicality of the plans, and we know that every building is different, love to be able to come back and say, here's some other ideas we want to consider as well.
Thank you.
Cindy, I just wanted to offer up to Mr. Daly, we actually have some visual models of existing classrooms at all levels, elementary, middle, and high, with some of those desk capacities so they can see examples, so they could make it more than just a concept. They've actually been mapped on our actual rooms and so forth. So I have those that we can make available if that would assist.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm looking for other questions. If you have a question or a comment, if you either use the participant hand or just wave and we will spot you.
I see Amy Jane McWilliam has her hand up. Miss Vaughn has her hand up. Jamie Michael and Sedona Stewart.
Okay, then let's start with Ms. McWilliams.
Hi, thank you. I liked those plans. Those look great. I noticed when I was looking through the parent surveys, I didn't read all of the responses, but there was that really hot and really cold. I mean, both ends of the spectrum. And I definitely saw parents who responded that they just did not feel comfortable with their children returning to school without a vaccine being available. So in this case, would virtual school be an option for those parents? And is there any way that we can get information on those numbers? Because maybe that will impact the way the plan would move forward on how to space out kids and how many kids per classroom and that type of thing.
So those are great questions. And I would say, as we talked earlier, so pre-K through 5, the way it would work is if students are interested in continuing distance learning, we would try very much to try to tether them to a teacher inside of their current building so that they don't lose their student assignment when things calm back down and kids get back to school. 6th through 12th grade, we really would encourage, if somebody wants to continue with distance learning, really encourage them to enroll into our Leave Virtual program, because as we start getting into credits and seat time and GPA, all those considerations, we want to make sure that really all of those are being met so that they can get towards graduation. So yes, those are certainly options that we're considering. Great question.
And just one more thing in relation to high school students, because the focus is on, making sure elementary kids get that face-to-face. High school students also need that face-to-face, and I think the preference is to make it as normal as possible. I mean, I guess in a cleaning scenario, it would probably look better to have one group 1 week clean, one group the next week clean, but I think for them, for keeping them engaged and doing their work throughout the week and meeting with their teachers, even with the virtual, live classrooms, definitely I think the on-off, even though it may create some transportation tricky issues, I think it's going to be best for the student to keep them on the most close to normal rotation as possible. And that's just an input.
No, I think you're echoing what I think most people believe, that, we want to try to nothing replaces face-to-face instruction, right? Our lead, and I say that with caution too, because our virtual teachers do an amazing job engaging kids. That's why we're saying if a student was a 7th through 12th grade and they wanted to go full virtual, we really would encourage them to use that model, because, teachers have really been trained, and there's an onboarding that they go through and how to use their platform and be successful at it.
Thank you. Mrs. Vaughn?
Thanks. This is for Dr. Spiro also. Just first, real quick. So because the classes are live time, so that means that a student would be, student at home on a virtual day would have to be logging in to the exact time that his or her classes started, right?
Yes, ma'am, that's exactly right. So a student would follow his or her normals. If they're home, they would follow his or her normal schedule based around the time, their bell times for their school.
Okay, I taught high school a long time. And anyway, I can see that as a potential problem. All right, the bigger question is, you talked about the Friday day, and I know you said it could be Friday, Wednesday, whatever. In the hybrid, it was all virtual. The live classes, so again, everybody's logging in and the teacher's teaching a class to an empty room, or how would that look?
Yes, you're exactly correct. So on those days where all students are doing live distance learning, where the school's going through a cleaning, students would again follow their regular bell schedule. The teacher would be doing live classes. Yes, it would be a teacher, just kind of like we're all doing right now. We're all in an empty room, and the teacher would be sharing his or her screen, doing their instruction with the students in that live time. And
the classes, are they going to be the full time, or is there going to be a difference in your idea of this in terms of, I know block scheduling used to be 84 minutes. Would it be like 70 minutes instead? Or do you see it being full?
So because of seat time, the way we have it right now would be for the current time. So they met the seat time towards graduation.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, that's what I need to ask right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn.
Thank you. Okay, and I am unable to see the blue raised hands, but I do know that we had a couple of people in the chat who said that they have a question. We have Ms. Bravatt, you have a question?
Jamie, I can read them, or I'm sorry, Cindy, I can read them to you if you'd like.
Thank you. I'll come back to you right after Ms. Bravatt then. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, this is Crystal. Couple things. So one, for the situation where, let's say even on the staggered schedule where some students are virtual part-time and some are face-to-face, or everything is fully virtual, what about the parents who can't accommodate that? I mean, has that been considered? Has there been thought around that? Because, I mean, I'm fortunate enough to work from home until the rest of the year, but that may change. And so I was just kind of curious on what the discussions were around that aspect.
So there have been a lot of discussions. Obviously, there's been discussions, as we've gone towards distance learning about, that's why we're very concerned about academic loss, because we do know that some students have extra support at home while others don't have support at home. So yes, there are some inequities with that. And I'm curious for this task force, as we looked at, all those options, are there solutions that this group can come together with on how do we address that with our students who maybe don't have that support at home? Or is there another model or another method that we haven't thought of with that? So I do think, Crystal, that's going to be one of those pieces that this group's going to have to go to work on with us.
Okay. And then one kind of follow-up question that I had is a little bit unrelated, but in regards to COVID itself, it just seems like, because it is still relatively new, we still have a lot to learn about it, that recommendations are changing all the time. How is that going to impact like some of the models that you shared here? Because I know like even just regards to wearing masks, the CDC and the WHO have changed opinions on that, multiple times. So I'm just kind of curious if when recommendations change, if those are going to be taken into consideration as well, or is the timeline too short? So, because me personally, I do have concerns about, my kids wearing masks all day in school. So, that's something I'm, interested in. So would love to hear anybody's thoughts on that.
Thank you.
Just overall, I do agree. We are recognizing that these recommendations that may come from different agencies are changing, and we're going to have to be agile as a district when it comes to being able to respond to those changes. The other thing that we have always planned to do is to survey our community again, so follow up, because we think not only will guidelines and recommendations change, but perceptions will also change as well. So, so we'll continue to be just kind of taking the temperature of the Lee County community as we move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Atkins.
Cindy, I can read you the names of the hands up if you like.
Yeah, Jamie Michael is the next hand that I saw. Then it would be Sedona Stewart, Joe Capitaro, and then Isaac Dozier, Brenda Clark, and I'll keep it in that order.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have two questions. We need to really look hard at custodial staff and how we're going to do this, because currently custodians have to clean up towards 29,000 square feet. And that means a large number of rooms where they may have 15 to the longest I've seen is 21 minutes in a room. And if teachers don't enlist the kids to pick up papers and things on the floor, then they spend most of their time picking up papers, paper clips, those kinds of things, which slows them down. And it needs to be a really methodical way they go through that room, or it may be that we decide to purchase one of those pieces of equipment that we go through at the end of the day and spray them after they've been cleaned. The other thing is the concern with employees that work for the district, and say they're a bus driver or a custodian and they have to work those 5 days a week and their kids are on A, what are they going to do with their kids on B? Or if they have one kid on A, one kid on B, they can't even adjust their schedule because they'll always have one child at home. So we need to look at that with parents too that have multiple children to make sure they're on the same schedule.
So Jamie, I would like to talk about that, because part of all the committees that I worked with, that was one of the considerations we talked about, that we would try very much to try to group families, extended families, try to group them together to help parents if we went to a hybrid model where it was on and off. That was one of the pieces. There was a lot of conversation around that. And so that then would go back to the school when we're looking at doing scheduling of students, who's doing virtual, which day, which ones are face-to-face. We would try very much try to match them with their family members. So the groups that we did recognize that.
Okay, next hand I had was Sedona Stewart.
Thank you. So I've been having some friends follow along on the YouTube stream, and I got a question as to the hybrid schedules. And it's that our school, and I'm pretty sure most, work on the even odd schedule. And my friend was wondering how the hybrid schedules would work with that sort of thing, like all classes on the same day, or some classes be fully virtual.
So all those models where you saw A day, B day, Sedona is very much to what you right now at Bonita Springs High School. You take half your classes on A day, the other half classes on B day. So when you're split like that, you'd be face-to-face on some, and you'd be distance learning on others, which is why in that one Friday in that model, we rotated which student came virtual and which one came face-to-face, so that you weren't always seeing the same teacher face-to-face and always doing the same teacher's distance learning. We wanted to make sure that you altered that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice question.
Joseph Campitaro.
I just have two questions, one for Dr. Sparrow and then one for Dr. Savage. So Dr. Sparrow, going with the hybrid model, with the live lessons that are virtual, I guess my question would be, what would happen, and although we've had many hotspots open because of what happened the fourth quarter of school, the reality is that many teachers and students and parents had experienced connectivity issues. In the event there are live lessons and then there are connectivity issues with students that are watching virtually, is there going to be a contingency plan in place for those students to make up lost work? Or are teachers going to, fulfill the role of troubleshooting while instructing as well? How would that look?
Great question, Joseph. And so I'll let I'm going to let Trey talk about the connectivity issues, but I would certainly, before any plan to roll out, we would certainly be working with the union and really coming up with some guidelines on those type of scenarios that would happen. So, I would, if you're asking me my own personal opinion, personally, if I had a student that was on distance learning and we lost connectivity with that whole group, I would hold those kids harmless. I would not hold those kids accountable because they didn't learn anything. So I'd have to go back and really reteach them to make sure they got that content before moving on. But those would certainly be issues that we would have to tackle before we rolled any plan out. And I don't know if Trey, if you want to talk a little bit about some of the hot spots and connectivity.
And I see Trey's picture, but that's Daryl Eldon's. So I don't know if Trey's on the line or not.
Yes, I am here.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yeah. So I echo Jeff's information there, Joe, as far as holding someone harmless should there be a connectivity issue. I mean, as you know, there's weather-related issues, there's physical infrastructure issues. There are issues where fiber lines get cut, for example, that are beyond control of the family and or the district for that matter. So you do have to have a contingency in place there to deal with that issue. And of course, we have ways to monitor and track the connectivity at a student level and so forth there. So, and as far as a support mechanism, of course, we work through our school techs. We have a joint agreements with obviously schools and our own field techs to provide support to assist not only on end user level, but also on an infrastructure level as well. So definitely have those plans in place. Great question.
Thank you. And real quick, and thank you, Dr. Sparrow. Dr. Savage, I just had a question about hand washing guidelines. Now, this is coming strictly from an elementary teacher's perspective. Now, we could all agree, obviously, that's going to be crucial, hand washing, right? We all know that. We're going to obviously want our students to do it in staff. When you say guidelines, are we going to actually get some form of a directive of before they eat every 30 minutes? And the reason why I say this is going back to being an elementary school teacher and even talking on behalf of teachers that teach kindergarten and so on, first grade, we want to minimize the interruptions in instruction. Whereas you could have kids spending, 20 minutes standing in line washing their hands. You do that multiple times throughout the day, you're losing, an hour, 2 hours of instruction each week. So how would we address that as teachers?
Joe, and I know Joe, so I can tell you he's not only a fifth grade teacher now, but he's done kindergarten. He knows exactly what he's bringing up as a challenge here, and he speaks for many. I would say that's why these things are under evaluation in terms of to what extent it's a balancing act in terms of making sure that we're maximizing our opportunity of safety while not literally standing in front of a water faucet washing hands all day long. And that's why it's a balancing act of a number of different mitigation efforts. It'll be guided by the science and guided by experts in terms of like Beth Whiff, for example, is our health services internal expert. But that's why we also rely on guidance from Lee Health, the health department, the CDC for all those types of pieces. There's fortunately some states are already putting out specific guidelines for schools that give them that real piece of it. And so we're taking all those things under advisement. So again, all those things have been evaluated and are being evaluated. I would not say that a firm decision has been made, but I would also say that it would be graduated developmentally. So it would probably be for young children. There would certainly be some considerations related to that, but procedurally, you would want to ensure that we're maximizing safety.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Okay, just trying to be sensitive to the hands. I did see Isaac Dozier had his hand up at one point. I don't see it now, but the question was, how will students that are concurrently enrolled in high school and college be handled?
So we're going to have to work with the college systems. We have yet to know how they're going to be doing fall classes. And so if they're going to be virtual, then, we're going to have to do the same thing. They're going to have to do classes virtual. If they're live, then they could go live. And so their schedules, like we do anytime for high school students, we make sure that their schedules are flexible so that they can attend their dual enrollment courses. But as far as whether or not they're virtual or face-to-face, we do not know that yet.
Okay, the next hand I have is Brenda Clark, and then I'll go to having some of the ones that came across through chat, and then I'll go back to Kevin. So Brenda Clark. All right, don't see Brenda, but maybe we can come back. The next one I have, Jackie Lineberger. My concern or question is virtual learning works well with the motivated students. What was the last quarter success? What was the last quarter success of kids? Did kids do the work? And then with temperature checks, what is going to stop a parent to medicate a child with Tylenol and sending to school? So when at first in school, no fever, what then?
I could talk to you about the success rate. Obviously, I could get that data and certainly share it with this team and what our success rate is. We know that some kids do well in distance learning and some don't. I believe, it was part of the conversation I believe Crystal was talking about earlier, is we really are going to have to, this group here, consider, as we ask those questions, what are we doing with the student that's not motivated by distance learning, how we deal with them. And I think we're going to have to kind of think creatively and out of the box. Maybe that's a group we consider doing something different. Maybe that's the group we say comes face to face. Who knows, right? So that's something this group has to be able to help provide some guidance to the superintendent with.
And then Scott Hertz had just asked, can the presentation be emailed to the task force now for use during the meeting?
I'm doing that as we speak.
Okay, and then I saw Jewel's hand up, and also you have a comment, Jewel, that you submitted. So go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I was just curious. I have actually 2 comments on the chat, so I'll just address them now. With the survey data that Ms. Cindy presented, I looked through it. It was a massive amount of data, so I appreciate you collating, putting things together. However, when you show the English and the non-English, it gives the appearance that there was a greater response from the non-English, when in fact it was only approximately like 6% of non-English speaking and 93, almost 94% of English speaking. So I was just thinking about that and some other things, but also with regards to the virtual days at home to accommodate parent schedules or the ones that may not have the same support as others, is it possible to record the live lessons? I went through grad school for my master's degree entirely online from recorded lectures and, the ability to follow with my professor as well. So is that an option?
Certainly recorded lessons could be, an option that we consider moving forward. But when we talk about, trying to keep students motivated, engaged, one of the things we did hear from the distance learning is when students were given just that work to do and they didn't have that constant access with that teacher, they felt less connected, and it was less rigorous for them. So I know the work with the committee was really to try to do that live, face-to-face, but certainly there could be options of times when a lesson could be recorded, what we call as a flipped classroom, which is an educational instructional strategy, that model could be used, but certainly we wouldn't want to see that on an ongoing basis, because we still want to make sure kids that are home are also being engaged with the lesson.
Okay, I was just thinking in lines of one of the models you presented where they'll be at school one day and not one day, that kind of thing. Also, were these models developed prior to the survey results, or was were the models based on the survey results, I guess?
So both. So the initial planning was before the survey went out. We had a lot more models than what we're presenting here today. Okay. There were so many different models. And then as we started paring down and we looked at the survey results, when we had our various groups that came in and looked at all those models, that was one of the pieces that we looked at were the results after the survey results came back.
Okay, thank you.
And I wanted to give Brenda another opportunity if she's on the line. and then I'm going to go to Scott Hertz. Okay, Scott.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you go. There's Brenda. Yes.
Sorry. Having some difficulties. My question is that just from my daughter being in class and the teachers being, it's a challenge for them to teach the kids that are in class, let alone the kids that are online and in class. From a standpoint of time, have we thought about how a teacher can actually effectively teach both online, virtually, and in the classroom effectively in a given class period?
Yes, which is why I said this is, that this is definitely going to be a challenge for teachers. We know that nothing replaces good face-to-face instruction, but unfortunately, we are in a situation where we have to look at various models. Is this ideal? No. Is it going to be a challenge for teachers? Yes. Will it change the way that we have instruction? Yes. Will teachers need some professional development to know how to balance all of that? Absolutely. All those are true. But Brenda, we do and did recognize that concern.
And the second part of that is there's a lot of things that go into the changing with the classroom and the kids. Have we thought about the psychological impact that mask wearing for teachers, mask wearing for kids could play a role in social distancing from their friends, the effects that long-term we'd have on the kids? Also, is this something that will change over time? Is this temporary?
So we are keenly aware of what we're really considering trauma. Like all of our kids have gone through some sort of trauma with this distance learning. And so we are planning right now, matter of fact, the past 2 days, we have trained assistant principals and principals on trauma, making really trauma-based decision-making. We are looking at preschool for teachers, focusing in on how to train teachers on that trauma and how do we address those concerns with children. That's going to be our sole focus coming back to fall, is addressing the social, emotional needs of adults and children both, because we know this has been difficult for everybody. So that's going to be, before any academics can start, we have got to address the social, emotional needs of students. And, as far as masks, we know that's an issue, and I can certainly let some other team members talk about masks and what that would look like coming into the fall.
Yeah, speaking of masks, we did have a couple questions there. Masks for K3, maybe K5, pretty impractical regardless of guidelines. This is Scott Hertz. Trying to picture a teacher trying to manage kids taking masks off and playing with them. Then Amy Jane McWilliam, my 7-year-old can't keep a mask on without touching face and messing with it. I don't think masks are practical for that age group. So just the comments that are in the Zoom chat. And I don't know if anyone wants, any of my team wants to react to that, but that is certainly a consideration.
Yeah, and that just highlights a lot of what we're hearing across the whole country. That is not, I can assure you, that is very well represented in the literature in terms of the appropriateness of students of a certain age. And again, it's a definite balancing act. That's why various different things are under consideration. Beth may want to add some clarity there too. Beth, feel free, you don't have to, but if you have anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that we are aware of the challenges, especially with our younger students on some of these safety issues, health issues that we're going to be facing. And that's why we welcome input from all of you on your personal experiences and then just what you're seeing from the last couple of months with the guidelines from the CDC, with your children, with your students. So that we can make an informed decision on how we can best keep everyone their safety in mind, and keep them healthy while we're following the guidelines in respect to that. So we are aware of that and are going to take all of those into consideration with many options. So I appreciate that feedback.
All right, I'm going to go back to a couple of the raised hands. I know Mr. Daly has been patient, so he'll go next, and then Ms. Vaughn, and then I'll go back to the chat questions.
So thanks. Patience is my middle name. A couple of things that I've just kind of seen here and thought about as this is moving is the ideas of cameras in the classroom. That's certainly, I know we're in COVID and I know we have to possibly make, new arrangements, but, cameras in the classroom can be distressing. And then secondarily, I know anybody who's been in the classroom knows that, 60 minutes out of 60 minutes, it's full attention on the students in the room and supervising students in the room. And part of the reason this meeting is going so well is because we've got somebody doing the PowerPoint, somebody watching the hands up, and somebody else monitoring the chat. And so I'm concerned with one teacher in a classroom with 15 kids in the room, 16 kids online, and their ability to successfully supervise the students in the room and on the chat. And then what happens if something gets out of control in the chat and they're paying attention to the classroom. And so again, from a supervisory point of view, I'm not sure, how we're going to handle this. It'd be great if we could have, people assigned to teachers to monitor chats. That would be fabulous. I don't know where those employees would come from. I have some ideas. But, again, if I'm teaching a room full of kids, a half a room full of kids of world history, and I got a half at home, I need to be aware of the questions in the room, the questions on the chat, the behavior on the chat, the behavior in the room. And then, like, if I give my kids in the room an assignment, would I also have uploaded that to the virtual kids that day and then need to get it from them? So just a couple of more concerns as I sit here and think.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Vaughn, or I don't know if any of you all want to respond to that, or certainly things we do need to be thinking of, so thank you, Kevin. Ms. Vaughn?
Yeah, well, I am glad Kevin brought up the behavior because, frankly, I'm thinking of high school kids with God only knows what written across their masks, whatever. But anyway, my serious question is, what kind of thought has been given to our students that are involved in our academies? Most of the academies are hands-on, and how's that going to be dealt with? And we might include with that, it's the time of the day that the 6th through 12th grade student is taking PE. What does that student do? Or ceramics, or one of those kinds of hands-on things. How are those going to be dealt with?
Great question, and that's why we had a lot of different people look at these models. So Rita Davis, Career and Technical Education, was one of those at the table. And so one of the things we talked about, if it was, let's say, for example, the academies, it might be on the one day you are doing the hands-on when you're there face-to-face, and it might be that when you're home doing the distance learning, that you might be when the other students are doing the face-to-face where they're doing their hands-on, you might be doing something else to support something. It might be a reading, it might be a writing, but something to support the learning of the face-to-face. So kind of just like a teacher would in a regular classroom where some groups of students may be engaged in one activity and others might be in something else, that would be similarly structured that way as well.
Yeah, and I see that as a huge, that's going to be a huge issue, because the kids, for instance, if they're in South Myers and they're in the auto shop, they're not wanting to read about fixing cars. They want their hands there. They want, in some of the other academies, they have to have medical academy. If they're seniors, they need to have their clinical hours, and I'm not sure what other academies need that. And the specialized equipment that are only in the classrooms, like the design equipment and those kinds of things, I see those as being real challenges for for us.
Agreed, and that's why we have this task force to be able to consider those
Yeah,
and be able
so
to bring some ideas forward. Because we understand that, and like I keep saying, these are not ideal. I mean, nothing that face-to-face, hands-on is what we want to have happen for our kids. But unfortunately, we have to think differently.
Yeah, I know Kevin Daly, we had a meeting today, and he said that he has special, like, groups of PE teachers and pre-K teachers and that sort of thing. Could I ask Kevin, or have we involved the teachers that do these academies and the certifications? Because again, I know it's really big at Dunbar, the Microsoft certifications, and I'm guessing that those kids to do those things, the computer, they have to have that special software, don't they? So I see that as a real stumbling block, and the thing is, some of those kids, that's what really motivates them for school. Those, I taught English, they could care about missing Beowulf, but when they miss fixing something on the car, it's going to be a lot more important to them. And that's
So if I can respond.
some questions.
So I have a daughter, second daughter in a row going through the Medical Academy of South Go Wolfpack. She may not be able to get her certifications this year due to COVID because of missed time at clinicals and testing. And we're right across the street from South, and so I'm in there all the time anyway. And I've been speaking to the welding teacher at South, and he's done pretty well. But Ms. Vaughn, you're right. At some point, you got to put a torch in a kid's hand, and or a wrench in their hand. And I'm a big supporter of the academies because sometimes they're the reason kids go to school. Like that's the draw for a lot of kids at the secondary level. That and the arts and music, that's kind of their reason for going. And so I'm going to start with him and see if he can put a group together, kind of a diverse group together to best meet their needs. And I don't know, if people are able to get to schools, like the welding students, if we could have lower class size every so often and still deal with theoretical. But yeah, that's an interest too. But I'm big into the academies. I think we do a great job with the academies, and I think it provides an opportunity for students who may not be wanting to go to college to exit and get a greater than minimum wage job and fill a real need in the community. So so we need to keep those students motivated and engaged as much as possible as well.
Thank you. And I see that Samantha Hauer has a hand up, and since she deals with that on a daily basis, I think this comment may be in response to that.
Yeah, and it's kind of a question along with some piggyback comments. And I guess my question would be for Dr. Savage. In terms of safety, one of the concerns we have with the fine and performing arts is cleaning the materials, because some of the materials that get used, one student's going to touch something and they're going to consume that material with their project and then move on. But some of that's really shared. And even if you're looking at crayons, that paper, those can get dirty even in the cleanliness of environment. So one of our concerns is, how are we within the arts, fine and performing, to ensure that we're maintaining a safe environment, and then also to kind of highlight, to piggyback off of the academies, that we've got stuff we need to give students to work with. We toss around ideas with making things that we can send home, like art packs. I know one of my teachers at Mariner made packs to send home to students to get them through that last quarter. But there's a lot there that we do have concerns with, and we also want to maintain that position where we are some of the reasons that students come to school, and the impact that we can have on that social emotional learning as well with the fine and performing arts.
Thank you, Samantha.
All right, Cindy, just to keep us, in order, I've got Scott Hertz, then Isaac Dozier, and then I see Jewel Harris with her hand up.
Great, thank you. Mr. Hertz.
So I know I can read you a question in terms of transportation. how long should arrival departures take with social distancing, he had asked.
And the concern is, you know, based on the idea of keeping all of the students in by classroom in both elementary school and certainly middle schools as well, if you're going to do the distancing on the bus, I'm starting to picture arrivals and then departures particularly could take hours and hours and hours to walk the students off the bus in those groups and try to maintain a 6-foot distance between students. So I'll be blunt and say by my question, I'm sort of insinuating, unless Dr. Savage or someone has some amazing idea, that's going to be pretty impractical, unless you guys have some amazing solution to suggest. So I have some concerns about how that would be done.
Mr. Hertz, you definitely bring up it would be a major logistical issue, but in varying different ways. One of the things that is in consideration is taking temperatures immediately upon arrival, whether that's in the bus or in the parent drop-off area. And so you have that. You also have, as they're arriving, they're getting off the bus, how do you maintain the distancing while also processing each of those students individually, and then how do they transit from that area to where they have to go? It's really opposite. By the end of the day, you're not necessarily having to worry about taking temperatures because by that point, all students have been through your typical day screening, but now you're trying to get them to their bus in a timely manner. So it's certainly our times, we would rely greatly. This is part of this is also Dr. Spiro's role because the school development handles all of our basically processes on how we transit students around the building from those entry points. That's our administrators and staff play a significant role in that. There's just a lot of different things under current consideration, and a lot of it really depends on the extent to which, what do those capacities look like? Because obviously if you have a lower capacity on a bus, fewer students being transported, that, you know, expedites that to some extent. The more you have, there's just a number of different considerations. So it's hard to give you one blanket answer other than to say, you're absolutely right. There are a lot of logistical issues. Fortunately, I don't think it would be multiple hours in terms of what we've looked at initially, but it is certainly longer than what we're used to. So I just want to validate that there's certain very significant challenges there. Dr. Spiro, did you want to add anything?
Thanks, Dr. Savage. No, as I said earlier, our executive directors would be working directly with school principals to make sure that they had all those procedural safeguards in place based around the footprint of their building.
Thank you. And Dr. Atkins, I know we had a couple more people that you had in line there. And if we could take those two, and then we will cut off new questions and finish up the ones in the chat because we are getting close to time.
All right. If you don't mind, I'm going to go 3 because I think I had one other one that maybe Mr. Dozier, Jewel Harris, and Angela Haas are the 3 that I have. So, Mr. Dozier.
Hi. Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. My question was specific. I also chatted it. My question was specific to finding innovative ways like the grab and go system, which worked well to reduce some of the challenges based on transportation logistics. So my question was whether or not the district was considering an intentional partnership with the after-school providers that are currently serving some of your most challenged student population. And what I mean by that is instead of having a tutor at home or the Boys and Girls Club that is well-intentioned and has, a curriculum for 8th graders, is the district considering a more intentional, home-based learning model? That could look like, every student that enrolls in the after-school program or based on the neighborhood they're at, there's a feeder campus for additional tutoring support especially on the virtual days when you don't go into a school. Maybe you can walk to your neighborhood Stars Complex or Boys and Girls Club, and there's a person who's specifically assigned with access to the teacher's syllabus that can work on particular functions or fundamentals that are specific to the teacher's syllabus. And I'm really looking at it as a way to be aligned and also to support the achievement gap for students at home without the necessary supports.
Thank you, Mr. Dozier. And yes, in answer to the very first question there, I know that we are always looking for partnerships. And so I believe Adam Malloy had also responded to you, and part of his position, brand new to our staff, is to reach out and work with those community connections. So I'm sure that you two will be working together. Is there anyone else that would like to respond to Mr. Dozier? Okay, thank you.
Yes, Cindy, this is Jared.
Yes, Jared.
To Mr. Dozier's point, for the support for the summer extended learning opportunities, we did establish a connection between academic services and Dr. Quisenberry to start the conversation with the STARS complex. So I know that there was a chance for them to also enroll as a part of the virtual opportunities for extended learning with iReady and some other support. So in conjunction with Mr. Malloy, we can coordinate with Mr. Dozier and get some additional providers.
Great, thank you, Mr. Eady.
Okay, Ms. Harris?
Yes, sir. I know that the survey that was sent out was an opportunity to welcome public input, but just listening to all the models and the different questions that have come up during this meeting, is there an opportunity now that the models have been presented, options, to have an opportunity for public comment? Because I don't believe, just based on looking at the information from the surveys, that it represents the full district. There's only a small sample of the whole district. And kind of like with the school board meetings or district advisory council, and I know that the meetings are streamed live on YouTube, is there an opportunity for public comment now that the models are out? And I understand the purpose of the task force is to, kind of like hone in and make decisions, but I really think that is very important in, with the pandemic and everything going on, and to give everybody a comfort level and to address a lot of these concerns that have been brought up, that maybe an option for public comment would be appropriate.
Thank you. Let me begin by saying, yes, part of this task force job is to look at those models and also to reach out to your connections that you have so that you are gathering some other public input there as well, and to come back to this group with some recommendations and possible solutions to some of the questions that have been raised today. In terms of additional public comment, I'm going to defer that to Dr. Atkins to talk about opportunities for that.
Well, I think there's a couple things that we can certainly contemplate, and that is, as these are live streamed, the public always has an opportunity to email responses into us, and I'm anticipating that occurring. And those are things that can be shared with this committee moving forward. For the sake of time, this is not a board advisory committee or an action meeting, so we didn't have a public comment section of it, but certainly getting input via other means such as email is certainly something that we're open to. And Lauren, I don't know, I know you guys that has also been discussed. If there's anything else that you wanted to add?
While we're waiting for Lauren to unmute there, also we do have some board advisory committees that will be meeting over the summer, and they will have an opportunity to comment as well. And they, again, are representative of many members of the community. Lauren,
is it a way to, how the district sends out, I guess, a school messenger? I get text messages and whatever to notify people of the live stream of the task force meeting so that people can be aware of, that the general public can be aware of these meetings. Because I talked to several people, they didn't even know the meetings were going on, and I directed them to the school district website.
Yeah, so we have it listed on our calendars as a public meeting on the school district site, and then we've been sending out, this one came by pretty quick, as we all know, because we got the stuff 48 hours in advance on Monday. So next week, so it'll be 4 o'clock, so we'll have that. So there'll be a little bit more time in between, but we've talked about using School Messenger, and just because we're live streaming, the feed is still there in perpetuity. So basically what we've also talked about is sending it out after the fact. So if people weren't able to catch it live from 4 to 6, that they could go back and watch, and then they could still send us feedback on that reopening. And then the other thing that Dr. Atkins, and I think Dr. Spiro maybe mentioned at the beginning was that, this was an initial survey so that we could start getting some feedback. And as we narrowed stuff down, it's been our expectation all along that we would try to put out some other surveys to be able to narrow down and get some feedback that way.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Stillwell.
Yeah.
I know Angela Haas has been very patient, so Ms. Haas.
Yes, a few parents are following along on the YouTube channel, and they're really concerned with the elementary hybrid model because in that model, all of the students are still in the classroom. It's not split like in the middle and high school. So they're concerned that the teacher is not going to be able to maintain social distancing of students, making sure they attend to hand washing, being able to disinfect surfaces as frequently as they need to be, especially in kindergarten and first grade where kids put their mouths on everything. And still be able to effectively teach the class.
So my response to that is we did have various models where we did have elementary doing some distance learning. We had elementary using some middle school buildings and trying to spread kids out. In high school buildings, we had a lot of different models when we first began this, which all then ultimately also have huge transportation implications, which then, of course, trickle up to middle school and high school as well. And so we hear them, and if this task force comes back with a recommendation that they want to do the same thing for pre-K to 5th grade, then certainly that would have impact on the other hybrid models for 7th through 12th grade, and we would have to, as a group, this group here, look at working out the solutions to that, because what happens with one schedule impacts everything with transportation as well. And I don't know if Dr. Savage wants to jump in on that at all.
Sure. It just like everything else we've kind of seen, it's a real balancing act. So, just to kind of, there's a number of layers kind of meshed in the question that you asked there. Transportation is one of them, but that's not necessarily even the biggest one that kind of jumps out to me. The goal and the priority undergirding that model was that elementary students, because of their age, the priority was that they would be in school daily frequency because parents may be at work and they don't have the ability, as older students may be able to have, they may be able to make other arrangements for those students. You're particularly vulnerable when you're talking young children. The offsetting feature by them being in school, though, is that the young children are relatively contained. So the disinfecting and the hand washing and things of that nature are, the level of frequency of what those will be, those are all being evaluated. What is reasonable? What can be done that allows them to be safe? And that means limiting their contact with other students. That does not mean that the distancing is a feature we've talked about kind of in every single one of these. What level of distancing occurs is also under evaluation. If you were to be at the strict 6-foot guidance, if that were to be the decision and implemented at that really reduces the number of students in that room. If you were to go less than that number, 3 feet, 4 feet, any of those other iterations, then again, that raises the capacity. So just a lot of different factors that go with that, but I can assure you that we'll be guided by health services and our medical experts in terms of what is the best recommended path. So that hopefully that addresses your question.
Thank you. And in interest of time, we will look at the questions that are on chat and we will email those to you along with the appropriate answer from the appropriate staff member. But we are getting close to our 6 p.m. time and we still have a couple more things to discuss. So we'll cut off questions for right now. Again, we will make sure that all those questions in the chat box are answered. We'll get those to you. And I'm going to go back to screen sharing for just a minute to talk about the next steps. Are you able to see, do you see next actions? And make sure you're seeing the right screen. Yeah. Let me do this again. Are you seeing it? Yes. Okay, great. So the first action obviously is to review the plans because they were presented rather quickly because of our time period and there's a lot of information there, a lot of thought went into those but obviously we're open to suggestions on those, to new ideas, to some possible solutions to questions that were asked tonight. So please take your time, go over those, share them with your contacts so that you're getting additional input. And then any questions that you have, you're going to submit those. We will send out the mailbox to you, but we have a reopening schools at leeschools.net mailbox that community members can also submit questions in. And then our next meeting, if you will come back with any suggestions that you have, if you have some recommendations around specific plans, we will be talking about those. And then any additional questions. We are on a fairly tight timeline because school's going to be opening in August, and we need to be making some decisions, hopefully by the end of the month, in order to be able to move forward in a manner that's going to have us ready to open doors, beginning of August. So any questions about those next steps? Dr. Atkins, if you can monitor hands for me, please, because I can't see them while I'm sharing.
Yeah, will do.
Thank you. Okay, it sounds like we're good there.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so our last thing is to talk about our plus delta for the evening. So what things worked well for you tonight in terms of the information that was shared, the format, and then what are things that we can think about for our next meeting that may make it easier for you? Okay, and I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see you better, if you'll be thinking about those.
And if you do use the raise hand model or option, I can see that and let Cindy know.
I can see them now.
Okay.
I was thinking they would show up on the pictures, but they did not. Thank you. Okay, so things that worked well for you this evening that you appreciated about the presentation, things that helped you learn today.
Cindy, we've got some pluses in the chat. Okay. The chat worked well. Many questions can be done in the chat and then read answered as was done. And the visual charts of the schools was very helpful. Consideration for all types of learners and children that need extra help. And then the summary charts of survey look useful.
We would prefer to have had those in advance too, but our tight timeline for this week meant that those were still being done this morning. So now that we have a week in advance, hopefully we will be able to get all materials out to you a minimum of 24 hours in advance. But yes, thank you. Okay, I'm looking to see if we have others coming in there. And thank you to Dr. Spiro and Mr. Hertz on your recommendation with the chat in terms of how you used it at DAC. That was very helpful for us this evening.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Any other questions? Not about models. Questions about next steps. All right. Well, I am excited to say that we've finished on time here. Really appreciate the time that everyone has taken to be here. I know that you will spend the next week really digging into these models and coming up with things that we haven't even thought about yet, and we appreciate that. That's why you're here. Again, if you have questions that you need answered between now and then, please email those, and we will get those answers back to you as quickly as possible. We really appreciate the time that you're taking and the representation that you are providing to our community. Dr. Atkins, do you have any closing remarks?
Not really, just to say again, thank you so much. We've got a huge task in front of us. I really do appreciate the help with it. So thank you for putting in the time and the patience getting to all the questions and responses.
Thank you. Mrs. Vaughn, anything you would like to add?
I think it's all the thank yous. I'm echoing those and nothing else. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, you know, as I look at the people who are with us this evening and looked at the list, the experiences and the diversity of our group gives me great hope that we are going to present a plan to the board that's going to work well for all of the students in our district. So again, I really appreciate the work that's being done here, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Thank you.
All right, thank you.